This is a video to prepare you for the Unit 1 Nature of Science and Engineering ISN Check. Please make sure your cover is securely fastened to the front and make sure your first and last name and period are included. To make sure you're prepared, please make sure you've used School Loop for any missing pages that you might need to print out or check out the absent file. On page 6, we have our Unit 1 Nature of Science and Engineering with our essential questions for the unit. You will be decorating this sometime next week. On page 7 is our unit table of contents. There is an updated table of contents linked on School Loop. There's also one right here. Please make sure your table of contents is filled in. On page 8 should be the Unit 1 Nature of Science and Engineering vocabulary. Please make sure you visit School Loop for the Quizlet link to practice these words in a more meaningful way than just looking at this paper. Here at Quizlet, you can practice matching and also doing other variety of games to practice these words. On page 9 should be the paper we did on qualitative and quantitative observations and inferences. And on page 10 is the challenge we did with the scientific method with the 6 swimmers. On page 11 should be a warm-up. This is where we create a visual that describes the steps of the scientific method. And on page 12 we have the flowchart for the scientific method. On page 13 is the Venn diagram comparing the scientific method with the engineering design process. And across on page 14 is the Look It's Flinking lab. Please make sure that these are completely filled in. On page 15 is the Roll-A challenge, and across on page 16 is our design process diagram that we wrote in class. On page 17 is the variable practice using SpongeBob from the warm-up on September 17th. And across from that on page 18 is the testable hypothesis sheet where we practice identifying controls, constants, and variables. On page 19 was the metric lab stations we completed, all 9 stations, and across from that are the metric measurement notes on page 20. On page 21 is the Sultan 6 steps for a great graph, and behind that was a warm-up from September 22nd on metric conversion. Across from that on page 22 was the volume venture lab where we practice measuring volume, and on 23 should be your left-hand, right-hand testing sheet. Page 24, the righty-lefty lab sheet. Page 25, the warm-up from 923, looking at parts of Sultan, and then also the left-hand, right-hand conclusion, with page 26 having the graph from that data. Also, we have on page 27, the warm-up from 928, looking and designing an experiment, and page 28 is the design and experiment where you actually created it. The graph for that experiment will go underneath the warm-up from 928. And then lastly on page 29 should be your Unit 1 study guide. If you're missing any of these handouts, please check the absent file or the daily agendas on School Loop to print it out. Happy studying!